They say the sea remembers every secret it swallows. I know one, it still tastes on its tongue, secret with red sails and a widow's steel spine. Picture the South China Sea before dawn, a hush like a held breath. A line of lanterns float on oil-dark water, their reflections trembling as if they're afraid. Out there, hiding behind a pale veil of mist, 100 hulls wait with their oars lifted. No drumbeat, no shouted orders, only the soft clack of bamboo against wood and the whisper of rope through calloused hands. Then a single fan, open silk, black as a moonless sky, and a woman's voice, low and even, says, "No survivors who defy the law." Her name, they called her Zheng Yi Sao, the wife of a dead pirate king, until she made the ocean itself kneel. She was not born to the sea. She stole it, bone by bone, command by command. They say she negotiated her own marriage like a treaty, that she measured the worth of men the way a jeweler weighs pearls, by pressure, luster, and fracture. And when the storm took her husband, the fleets turned to mist, and till she stepped into the void and the mist became a wall of iron. Now listen closely, because pieces of her story have been scattered by the victors like broken porcelain tossed into the surf. What I'm about to tell you was whispered in tea houses and scratched into the margins of ledgers no official ever saw. There were laws hers, there were punishments, there were flags red as fresh wounds, and there was a night when the Emperor's navy squinted into the wind and realized, too late, they were not hunting pirates. They were trespassing in a kingdom. You want to know how a widow seized 70,000 souls and made them row in time with her heartbeat? How a fan, a ledger, and a gaze that never blinked became deadlier than cannons? Good, lean closer. The sea remembers, and tonight it will speak. But first, step with me into the fog, onto a creaking deck where a single lantern sways, and a pair of eyes her eyes fix on a horizon no man ever dared to claim. The signal is not the drum. It is the fan closing, the silk snapping shut like a verdict, ready. Because in the next breath, the oars drop, the mist splits, and chapter 1 begins where all forbidden empires are minted, with a bargain at the edge of a blade. They would later say she appeared in Macau, the way a storm line appears on the horizon, first as a rumor, then as a rearrangement of the air, and finally as something you could not ignore without being humbled or broken. But before the red flags, before the ledger of laws that would choke a navy, there was a single room above it, a paper screen patched with rice paste, and a woman bent over a bowl of water, rinsing rouge from her face. She did not yet carry Zheng Yi's name. She wore another that slid off tongues and never caught. Names were tools. She was merely sharpening hers. Downstairs, someone plucked a sanction. Laughter rose like steam. Coins clicked. She listened to the music the way a tiger listens to the wind, not for melody, but for weakness. A knock came at the door. Not the quick, furtive kind she knew, but 3 measured raps, spaced like footsteps crossing a quiet courtyard. "Enter," she said, and did not stand. The man who slid the door aside had a sailor's skin and a merchant's gaze. His braid was tidy. His hands were not. He wore a simple coat with a collar polished from use, and he took the room in with one sweep. The porcelain bowl, the folded fan near the window, the paper fan stopper jammed under the sill to halt its rattle. He bowed, too short to be polite and too long to be careless. "Zheng Yi," he announced himself, as if that alone were introduction and warning. "We have a friend in common. We all have the sea in common," she said, and dried her fingers. It is not always a friend. He smiled with the corners of his mouth, but not his eyes. I've watched you bargain. With men, with rooms, with silence. You count better than most accountants. And you never buy anything you do not intend to resell for 3 times its worth. And what, she asked, lifting the towel, do you think I sell? Futures, he said softly. I need one, outside. A cart creaked. Somewhere in the alley, a bottle fell and shattered, and a drunk cursed. She waited and let that curse be the punctuation on his. Request, say it plainly. My rivals multiply while I am at sea, he said. I need leverage that does not rot in the water or rust in the wind. I need discipline ashore, eyes that cannot be bribed, a mind that understands hunger. Marry me. She turned, her face clean now, the paint deepened to nothing. You mistake me for a dowry. I mistake you for a weapon, he corrected. One that cuts both ways. You want something no man will give freely. I want the same. Between us, we could take it. She crossed to the window. The tea-house roofs ran like fish scales down to the harbour, where the masts bobbed like bamboo pinned in the sand. The world smelled of frying oil, salt, and ambition. It always had, but tonight it sharpened until it tasted like a blade on the tongue. What terms? She asked. His shoes whispered on the floor as he approached. You keep your name on the ledger, he said. You keep your fan. On the flagship, your seat will be beside mine, not behind it. You will see all accounts. No division of spoils without your tally. Any captain who defies you defies me. And when I am at sea, the crews will answer to you as they do to me. You will not touch the women taken in raids, she added, nor the children, nor will any man under your flag. Zheng Yi's face did not change. Only the exact angle of his gaze sharpened a fraction. Agreed, and if you die, she said, daring to say it aloud because she believed in naming omens to gut them, the fleet's answer to me. Not to whomever whispers into your brother's ears. Not to a cousin who remembers when you were small. To me, silence fell the way a net falls, quietly, then all at once. He bowed deeper this time. Then we bargain with the sea itself, he said. But the sea is a poor witness. It admires only power. We'll need another. She took up her fan and drew it open. The black silk made a breathy sound. Then let us get married in front of the men, she said, feeling the strange solidness of the decision settle in her bones like a ship setting its keel. Let them watch as we bind our fates and their pay. He grinned then, and for a brief second she saw the boy he had been, hungry, bright, and utterly unwilling to drown. They married on the flagship, under a sky-like hammered pewter. The decks had been scrubbed with sand until the sap bled from the planks. Lanterns hung from the rigging in a formal geometry that made the ship look like a floating palace. Men lined the rails in tidy ranks, more nervous than they would ever have admitted, because even cutthroats feel the tremor of the earth when a new mountain rises. A Buddhist monk stood between them, his robe a weathered orange, his eyes the calm of 1,000 dawns. He did not ask them to promise romance. He asked them to promise structure. The vows were spare, the way the sea prefers everything spare. No florid language, no metaphors. The monk held out a thin cord, and Zheng Yi and the woman who would bear his name knotted it together. 2 winds, the monk intoned. 1 sail, the men cheered. Someone beat a drum. Someone else later she would learn it was Chung Po, a boy with forearms like rope through a string of firecrackers into the air. They barked and sprayed sparks that fell into the water like molten stars, after Zheng Yi led her to the aft deck. A table held a ledger wrapped in oiled cloth, a brush, and an ink. He gestured, and she unrolled the ledger, revealing tidy columns of names, ports, expenses, bribes, cargo lost and gained, and the small, mean deaths of men remembered in spidery script: slipped, fever, rope, knife, see. This is yours, he said. Not yet, she said, and dipped the brush. The ink spread in a small blue-black bloom. The sea loves a promise, but it only respects a rule. She wrote the first law in the steady hand of a woman who had spent years reading faces and numbers, and now finally had something to write worth the ink. No harm to women. No theft of personal goods from fellow crew. All plunder to the common account. All shares to be drawn by law, not favor. Any captain who breaks the law will be broken by it. Zheng Yi leaned in, reading upside down. Ruthless, he murmured. Fair, she corrected. Fairness is always ruthless to the selfish. He laughed, surprised and pleased, and for a moment they were a new blade and a seasoned hilt finding their fit. It would not last, nothing on the water ever does, but it would be enough to make a crown out of storms. It began with numbers. It always does for empires that wish to outlive their founders. She visited every cook, every quartermaster, every bosun, and she asked questions until the men learned that questions could carve flesh as neatly as knives. How many sacks of rice to 100 men for 12 days if the wind dies? How many arrows can we bind without crippling the port's supply next month? How much does fear cost compared to respect, and how long does each last before needing to be paid again? When an answer wobbled, she tilted her head and the room felt the tilt as a shift in weather. When an answer held, she learned a name and tucked it in the ledger with a small mark she never explained. She made alliances the way other people make tea, with heat and patience. She brought in Chung Po, not as a concubine rumors would later try to fit her into a box that would hold Herbert as a blade that could be polished. He had a knack for reading wind even with his eyes closed. He could tell a mast was out of true by the way the deck felt under his bare feet. She turned him into a captain by telling him the one truth nobody had told him before. Loyalty isn't what you promise me. It's what you promise yourself. Chung Po blinked at that, trying to find the trap in it. To myself. You promise yourself you are not a dog, she said. You promise yourself you will not be bought by the first man who slaps your back and hands you a cup. You promise yourself you will not kneel to shame. Then, when you sail under my flag, I can trust you. Not because you love me, but because you love what you decided to be. He looked at the horizon, where the water wore its thin band of brighter light. Then I promise myself, he said. She nodded. Good. Now, promise me you will never leave a debt unpaid. Debts or weeds. Ignore them and they crack the hull. Their fleets red. Black, white, blue, green, and yellow were not, at first, truly fleets. They were colors glued onto habits. Captains who remembered when Zheng Yi was only a name that started with a hiss did not switch allegiance overnight. But the laws had a spine, and the spine bent men the way the wind bends reeds, slowly, then all at once. Shares were paid on time. Loot sold for fair prices. Injuries tended without favoritism. A man who tried to slip a captive woman into his cabin without declaring her met a fast end and a public one. The men called it harsh. The merchants called it a miracle. The sea called it symmetry. And still the empire watched. It always does when too much order appears where it expects only chaos. A magistrate from Guangzhou wrote to a war junk commander in a hand that looked like a man afraid of making a mistake. These pirates are not the usual rabble. They live by codes. Their leader keeps books. They are bad for business in the way a drought is bad for rice. Do something. The commander did what such men do. He assembled men who smelled of shore, and men who smelled of old storms, and men who smelled of ink. He lined them up and shouted them into a shape that looked like preparedness. Zheng Yi stood at the taffrail and watched their lanterns gather in the far distance like a tiny constellation that didn't know it had drifted into the wrong sky. "What do we do?" a captain asked, a man whose mouth always seemed to be chasing his next thought. "We go to work," she said. She let them see her walk from bow to stern. She let them count how many lines she touched, how many coils she straightened. They came without oars, letting the tide bear them like guilty thoughts. The small boat drifted under the shadow of the red flagship, its hull whispering against the mothership, as if promising it meant no harm. 2 men rose inside, each with the same posture, back straight, hands visible, eyes careful, but one wore the square cap of a minor civil official and the other the dark, weather-burnished jacket of a naval adjutant. Between them crouched a boy cradling a lacquered chest the size of a rice measure, its corners reinforced with brass. "State your business," Chungpo called, his voice carrying across the water with the crispness of someone who had not slept and did not plan to. The civil official lifted both hands higher. "We request parley," he said. His voice was firm, but the edges quivered the way a drumskin quivers after a soft strike. "We carry a letter." "A letter?" Chungpo asked, unimpressed. "We have fire." Zheng Yi Sao stepped to the rail, the lantern's glow painting her cheekbones in warm strokes. She had changed nothing, same black silk, same open fan, same steady gaze, but the crew's shoulders eased a fraction when she appeared. Power is as much the memory of yesterday as it is the certainty of today. She understood that and fed it as carefully as she fed the crew. "Bring them up," she said. Hooks with rope slings swung down, and the boy with the chest flinched at the first clank. The naval adjutant placed a hand between the boy's shoulders, the gesture almost paternal, surprising on a deck like this, and guided him into the loop. Within minutes they stood on the scrubbed planks, water dripping from their hems, their eyes adjusting to the constellations of lanterns, to the red sail hanging overhead like a low, watchful moon. The civil official bowed. "Honored Madame Zheng," he began, using the name that acknowledged her marriage and skirted her rule. "I am Liang Su, scribe to the Guangdong governor's second bureau, and I," the adjutant said. Bowing in turn, am Lin Ruo, adjutant to Commander Q Cheng. "We come under a flag of truce." Zheng Yi Sao's fan moved once, a brush across the air. "We honor your cloth," she said, "but not your assumptions." "Speak." The boy knelt automatically, placing the chest at his knees. His eyes, too large for his face, darted between the officials, between the ropes that creaked, between the men with crossbows posted like punctuation at the edges of the deck. He reminded Zheng Yi Sao of a shorebird caught in a sudden shadow. "Open it," she said. Liang Su nodded to the boy, who lifted the lid to reveal a stack of papers bound with silk, the topmost stamped with a red seal that still glistened with oil. The faint perfume of ink rose. sharp and clean, the smell of rooms, where the sea is discussed as if it were an equation. Liang Su took the top document and unrolled it with care. "This is a letter of accommodation," he said, choosing the word with the delicacy of a man picking bones from fish. "From Governor's son to the leaders of the so-called Red Flag and associated fleets." "So-called," murmured Sheng Po, and a few nearby men smirked in the tight, humorless way a soldier permits himself. "Read," Zheng Yi Sao said. Liang Su swallowed and began. The letter was couched in the ceremonial language of men who build palaces out of syllables. It addressed disturbances and irregular tariffs collected beyond the purview of the provincial treasury and the unfortunate necessity for corrective action, and then, surprising in its candor, shifted. It offered amnesty for men who would lay down arms, clemency for those who had merely rode and not commanded. And here Liang Su's voice ticked a little faster. Consideration of formal appointments for leaders who can prove their ability to maintain order along designated coasts. Appointments. Lin Ruo echoed, as if the word were a lifeline tossed at wolves in a storm and expected to transform them into dogs. Governor's son, Liang Su continued, believes that the energies of certain disciplined organizations might be directed toward the common good if sufficiently incentivized and monitored. Kung Po snorted. "We are to stop being pirates by becoming tax collectors." "Honor demands shapes," Liang Su said, surprising them with a sudden flare of backbone. "Even the water takes the shape of its container. And who is the container?" Zheng Yi Sao asked, her voice pleasant but cool. "Your governor, the emperor, the heavens. I have a container. It is called law." Lin Ruo stepped forward, fingers laced behind his back to keep them from trembling. "Commander Q has the emperor's fear in his ear, madame," he said. "He has lost ships, men, face. He must show a victory. But he is not a fool. He knows you have built something that does not fall when a mast snaps. He knows battle will be costly, uncertain. He proposes a performance instead." "I do not perform," she said, fan pausing mid. "I govern," the adjutant's mouth flattened. "Then govern with papers instead of powder. Accept a formal title. Accept limited jurisdiction. Accept stipends. Bring your men ashore in portions so they can be counted, recorded, civilized. The rest," he gestured at the sea, "dissolve like foam." "And what," she asked, "do you propose to call me?" Liang Su hesitated, then glanced at a second paper and read, cheeks pinking, Maritime Superintendent for Civic Order, Coastal Quadrant South. On the deck behind her, someone coughed over a laugh. Zheng Yi Sao did not smile. "Your governor thinks names tether storms," she said. "He is but he underestimates the rope he holds. It will wrap his wrists before it binds mine. You can save lives," Lin Ruo pressed. "Yours, your men's, the villagers. No more burnt docks. No more screaming." "There is screaming either way," she said softly. For an instant, something in her voice turned flint to asher, memory of a bed that would never again know the weight it had learned. Then the ash blew off, and the flint remained. "Leave the documents. You will have an answer by dawn." Liang Su looked relieved. Lin Ruo looked wary. They bowed. The boy closed the chest. Chung Po signaled, and the slings lifted the three down again, as if the ship, satisfied it had measured their weight, was returning them to the scale. When the small boat receded, lantern bobbing like a timid star, The deck breathed out. Men began to murmur. She let them for a minute. A leader who cannot stand a murmur will one day drown in a shout. Then she called the captains. They crowded the cabin, the air thickening with sweat, salt, and the particular odor of men who had already made up their minds in 8 different directions. She set the documents on the table and did not yet sit. She wanted them to see the papers hip high to her, not thrown high. The ledger lay beside them, black fan across its spine. Read, she told 3 men she trusted to find the meat beneath ceremony. They bent to their work. Others shifted, looked at their hands, at the maps pinned like skins on the wall. Their offer, one of the readers finally said, is to make us the emperor's teeth, provided we never bite his tongue. Teeth fall out, another said. Tongues stay. This is a trap, the scar-cheeked captain muttered. He had signed yesterday and already regretted the absence of the fight. They will tally us, then take us in pieces. We go ashore and never come back. And if we refuse, a quieter captain countered, they chase us until the powder runs like sand, and our dead are tallied by fish. Zheng Yi Sao let the argument bloom and tangle, then plucked it like a stubborn weed. We will not accept their name for us, she said. We will not march ashore like captives to be counted and tamed. But we will accept a conversation we can use. How do you use a mouth that wants to eat you? The scarred captain asked. By feeding it what it asks for until it forgets it was hungry for something else, she said. We draft terms. We propose an armistice measured in rice and taxes, not blood. We demand the right to police the waters we already police, in exchange for escorts to merchant convoys and a tithe to the provincial coffers. We insist on our law explicitly. We demand clemency for the men who have rowed, amnesty for those who have obeyed the ledger, and we threaten, politely, to let the smaller, uglier pirates loose again if any arm twists ours. You want to be a government? Someone marveled, half oh, I want our children to grow up knowing that a woman's signature can be a harbor, she said, and that a man's oath is not a mouthful of wind. Will they accept? Chung Po asked. They will accept what they can survive, she said. We will see what that is. She took brush and ink. For an hour the cabin became a different kind of battle. Strokes instead of strokes, parry with phrasing, strike with sums. Her script was neat and assertive. She enumerated protections, routes, ransoms formalized into fees, penalties for villagers that cheated and for captains who did the same. She left no corners where corruption could hide without first banging its head. When she finished, her hand ached. The slow work having woken nerves, the drum had only thrilled. She dusted the ink, rolled the document, tied it with red thread. At dawn, she said to Chung Po, you will deliver this. Not by skiff. On a captured war, junk repaired, crew well-dressed, flags clean. Let them see the future I am offering. Chung Po's eyes shone with a bright heat that was not merely loyalty. It was belief. Yes, he said. And you, she told the scarred captain, will take 3 cutters and make a show of shadowing their nearest patrol, never touching. Let the commander feel both a knife and a handshake. He scowled. I am not a dancer. Learn, she said, or drown. They laughed some at him, most at the absurdity that sounded like truth. Men love a threat that fits in the mouth like bone. They disperse to their ships. Word count, approximately 1,800 words. The horizon was a jaw full of teeth, black sails biting into the dawn. They moved not with the hesitant rhythm of fishermen, nor the clumsy squabble of imperial patrols, but with a practiced cruelty. Their oars dipped in unison, their hulls leaned with intention, and the water between them narrowed like a throat about to swallow. Zheng Yi Sao stood at the taffrail, fan half open, hair coiled high and pinned with the same steel she had once used to kill a man who thought silk meant softness. Her eyes tracked the formation, too neat to be rabble, too hungry to be navy. Wolves without collars, colors. She asked. Chang Po squinted, the morning glare sharp in his young face. None, only black cloth. No symbols. Cowards, spat the scar-cheeked captain. He stood by the rail, jaw set like stone, his hand twitching at the hilt of his dao, afraid to claim their name. Or clever, Zheng Yi Sao corrected. A faceless enemy is harder to punish. The fleet stirred behind her, men shifting, whispers rising. Some muttered prayers, others curses. Still others stared in silence at the approaching shadows. Sailors have long memories, and black sails had stories older than any one man's stories of slaughter, of ghosts that rode even when their bodies sank, of ships that disappeared without sound. They want us afraid, Zheng Yi Sao said, raising her voice just enough for the deck to hear. So let's be curious instead. The line broke into a ripple of uneasy laughter. Fear was poison. Curiosity, at least, could be swallowed. The first of the black-sailed ships cut across their bow, close enough that Zheng Yi Sao could see the rowers' backs glisten with sweat, their skin marked by lashes old and new. A man on the prow raised his hand not in greeting, not in parley, but in command. And then the sky filled with arrows. They came in a black hiss, cutting the air. Men ducked, shields lifted, ropes snapped. An oarsman screamed, clutching a shaft that had punched clean through his thigh. Another fell, gurgling, as blood sprayed across the planks. Shields forward. Chang Po bellowed, snatching a bow from a cowering youth. He fired in return, the arrow vanishing into the forest of black sails. The scarred captain cursed, his voice raw. Let's ram them. Hold, Zheng Yi Sao said, her fan snapping shut. The sound cut sharper than steel. Look at their spacing. Look, the captains froze, squinting through smoke and distance. She saw the gaps between the ships, too narrow for error, too deliberate for chance. They were herding, not hunting. A trap shaped like a net. They want us to charge, she said. Into a throat we can't escape. What do we do? Chang Po asked, breathless but steady. She smiled, the kind of smile that made her men straighten. We give them a new mouth to choke on. Orders flew. Drums thundered. The red flag fleet twisted, sails reefing, oars turning. Instead of charging forward, they split in two wings, curling like a serpent around its prey. The black-sailed ships, caught mid-advance, stumbled in formation. A cutter slid into a gap, loosing firepots that shattered against hulls. Smoke rose, acrid and choking. The enemy roared, voices harsh, tongues thick with inland dialects. Not fishermen, not villagers pressed into service. These were soldiers, men drilled in silence and unleashed with precision. Zheng Yi Sao read it at once. Mercenaries. Hired blades. The Empire's hand would never dirty itself openly, but it would pay men like these to test her law. They're bought, she said, which means they can be bought again. But first make them bleed. Chang Po led the charge on the starboard flank, his ship cutting across an enemy bow like a hawk striking. Grappling hooks flew. Men clashed on wet planks, steel against steel. The screams of the dying drowned only by the hiss of arrows and the crack of wood splintering. The scarred captain roared like a bull, swinging his dhow in wide arcs, cleaving through armor and bone alike. Blood painted the deck, slick beneath his boots, but he did not falter. For the law. He bellowed, and his men answered with a roar that turned fear into fury. Zheng Yi Sao stayed at the center, her flagship the spine that held the wings together. She issued orders with calm precision, fan pointing like a general's baton. Archers aim for the oars, sync their rhythm. Drummers double beat, make them think we're more than we are. A black-sailed ship swung close, its prow jagged with iron, its captain, a broad man with a beard plated in bronze rings, locked eyes with her across the water. He grinned, teeth yellow, and raised a curved blade in salute. She lifted her fan, tilted it once, and then dropped it. A dozen firepots arced through the air, trailing sparks like falling stars. They shattered on his deck, flames rushing up ropes and sails. The grin turned to a scream, swallowed by smoke. The ship burned, men leaping into the sea only to vanish beneath the crush of oars. The tide turned. One black sail fell, then another. The enemy's formation broke, confusion spreading like spilled oil. Some tried to flee, others pressed harder, desperate to salvage honor from ash. "Take one alive," Zheng Yi Sao commanded. "I want a tongue," the scarred captain obliged, dragging a bloodied prisoner across the deck by his hair. The man spat, curses teeth red, eyes rolling like a horse in panic. "Who sent you?" she asked. He spat at her feet. "The sea itself." She knelt, fan tapping his cheek, gentle as a lover. "The sea doesn't pay mercenaries." "Who does?" He laughed, choking on blood. "A prince with no crown. A magistrate with no honor. Call him what you want." "He calls himself master." She frowned. The same words whispered by the assassin in the governor's compound. A pattern, a shadow, a hand she had not yet seen. "Name him," she pressed, but he only smiled. Lips cracked and whispered, "Black sails never tell." Then he bit down hard, and the foam at his mouth turned pink. Poison, even his death had been bought. Zheng Yi so rose fan snapping open. "Throw him overboard," she said. "Let the fish eat his silence." The deck reeked of blood and smoke, but her men stood straighter now, victory hot in their veins. The black sails retreated, those still afloat limping into the horizon like wounded dogs. None chased. Discipline held. She looked at the sea, at the dying smoke, at the horizon that now seemed to quiet. "This is no longer about the emperor," she said softly, mostly to herself. "This is about a man who thinks he can buy the sea." Chung Po wiped his blade, eyes dark. "What do we do?" She smiled again, thin and sharp. "We find the master who hides behind black sails, and then we make him pay the sea's price." The men around her shifted, listening. They did not cheer. They did not need to. They understood the war had changed shape. No longer empire against outlaw. Now it was shadow against storm, and storms, unlike shadows, do not hide. The red flag sails snapped in the wind, red as fresh wounds, bright as fire. The sea carried them forward, toward the unseen hand that had dared to challenge a widow with 70,000 blades at her back. The war was only beginning. The storm after battle is never thunder or rain. It is silence. the kind of silence that crawls under your skin and makes you hear the creak of every plank, the drip of every bloodstain sliding off the rail into the sea. Zheng Yi Sao stood in the captain's cabin, lantern light flickering across the ledger. Ink smudges stained her fingers, but she did not notice. She was listening not to the men outside who whispered about victory, but to the weight of what had not been said, a prince with no crown, twice now from different mouths. Once in a governor's chamber, once from a mercenary's poisoned tongue. Too much coincidence, too sharp a shadow. Chung Po entered without knocking, his boots wet, his hair tied back with rope instead of silk. He smelled of salt and iron. The crews ask what comes next. He said, "Do we hunt the survivors? Do we wait?" Zheng Yi Sao closed the ledger. "Neither. We hunt the hand that threw them at us." Chung Po's brow furrowed. A magistrate, a noble, the empire itself. She lifted her fan, let the lacquer catch the lantern glow. No, someone who thinks himself above them, a man who builds power in corners, out of sight. If he is bold enough to buy fleets, he is bold enough to think he can buy ours. Chung Po spat into the brazier. The flames hissed. He will learn otherwise. She smiled faintly. He will learn what the sea charges for arrogance. The next morning, the fleet gathered at an inlet, a sheltered cove carved into the green jaws of a mountain. Red sails crowded the water like bloodied feathers drying in the sun. Captains came aboard the flagship, faces taut, some hungry for spoils, others wary of shadows. The scarred captain slammed his fist on the table. "Let us chase them, hunt them down while they bleed. Why waste time sniffing for a shadow? Because shadows kill more men than swords," Zheng Yi Sao replied evenly. She unfolded a map, spread it across the table. They came from the west, from inland. Their dialects were from Foshan. That means coin flowed up. Mercenaries march to the weight of silver. So we follow the silver. Another captain, younger, with hands to clean, frowned. "If it is a magistrate, we risk drawing the emperor's eyes closer. If it is a noble, we risk offending clans who own half the rice we eat. And if we do nothing," she asked, "gaze sharp, what do we risk?" Silence answered. The smell of tar and salt pressed in. Finally, Chung Po leaned over the map, his fingertip landing on the river delta north of Macau. There, merchants, whisper of a man who taxes boats without a title, a lord with no scroll. He is called only the prince. The scarred captain snorted. "Prince of rats, even rats," Zheng Yi Sao murmured, "carry plague." They set out upriver with a select fleet fast cutters, sleek junks with shallow drafts. The rest of the red flag remained at sea, guarding the coastlines. Zheng Yi Sao led the smaller force herself. A commander must be seen where danger breathes. The river coiled like a serpent, its waters thick with mud, its banks crowded with bamboo that whispered secrets in the wind. Villages appeared and vanished, huts on stilts, fishermen casting nets, children running barefoot along the banks to stare at the sails. Some waved, others crossed themselves and spat out at night. They moored beneath trees heavy with cicadas. Fires burned low. Men muttered about ghosts and black sails that might yet return. Zheng Yi Sao listened to their fear without anger. Fear was honest. It was a ledger of survival. On the third night, scouts returned with news. A mansion, a priver, one said. Walls white as bone. Soldiers at the gate, not in uniform. servants carrying crates stamped with imperial seals, but the crates never leave again. Zheng Yi Sao's fan opened with a snap. The prince's nest. They approached at dawn. Mist curled across the river like smoke from a giant's mouth. The mansion loomed above the reeds, its tiled roof glistening, its banners plain no crest, no family name. A house ashamed of its own roots. Land quietly, she ordered. No drums, no colors. The cutters slid into the reeds, oars muffled with cloth. Men waded ashore, water lapping at their thighs, swords drawn. Birds shrieked and scattered, as if warning the mansion. At the gate, guards lounged with spears across their knees. Their armor was mismatched, their eyes watchful. One rose, squinting at the fog. "Who goes?" He never finished. An arrow hissed, struck him in the throat. He dropped without sound. Chaos erupted. Zheng Yi Sao strode through the mist as her men surged forward. Blades clashed, shouts cracked the air, the mansion woke like a struck gong. She moved like the eye of a storm come, unhurried, her fan raised not to cool but to command, alive. She shouted over the din, "Bring him alive." The guards fought hard but without discipline. Mercenaries again, bought and paid. They broke under pressure, scattering into the reeds. Within minutes, the gates burst inward. Inside, the courtyard spread wide, paved with stones slick from mist. Servants cowered. At the far end, under a silk awning, a man reclined on a carved chair. He wore robes embroidered with silver thread, but no insignia. His face was long, his lips thin, his eyes the sharp, assessing eyes of a man who measured people the way merchants measure grain. "Welcome," he said, voice smooth as lacquer. "I wondered when you would come, Widow Zheng." Her fan stilled. "You are the prince with no crown," he chuckled. "Titles are given by fools. I take what I please." He gestured lazily. "Wine." The scarred captain growled, sword lifting. "I'll spill your wine and your blood, both." "Wait," Zheng Yi Sao commanded. Her eyes never left the man. "You sent the black sails." He inclined his head, unashamed. "Of course. You grow too powerful. The governor plays at partnership. The empire pretends to leash you. But I," his smile widened, "I offer something better. I offer you the river. Together, sea and river. 70,000 men could become 100,000. We could carve a kingdom neither emperor nor heaven could deny." A hush fell. Even hardened pirates stared, tempted by the sheer audacity. Zheng Yi Sao tilted her head. "And in this kingdom, who wears the crown?" His eyes gleamed. "We both do." The fan snapped shut with a sound like a blade drawn. "You mistake me, Prince. I do not share crowns. I break them." His smile faltered, but only for a flicker. "You think you can kill me here? In my hall, my men will rise from the walls. You will drown in arrows before you reach me." "Perhaps," she said softly, "but arrows cannot kill a storm." She lifted her fan high. Drums thundered outside. From the reeds, her fleet's hidden archers rose, bows drawn, torches lit. The prince's courtyard filled with firelight. His eyes widened as realization struck. She had not brought a handful of men. She had brought the river itself. "Seize him," she ordered. The scarred captain leaped forward. Guards rushed to block, but were cut down, their cries lost beneath the roar of men pouring through the gates. The prince tried to flee, his robe tangling, His thin lips curled in disbelief that anyone dared touch him. Rough hands dragged him down, binding his wrists. He spat, thrashing. "You cannot kill me. I am the river. The empire needs me." The people, Zheng Yi Sao said coldly. Stepping close, need law, not leeches. She raised her fan, and the scarred captain's sword descended not at his throat, but across his sealed chest. Silver coins spilled onto the stones, clattering like rain. The illusion of power poured away, shining and worthless. The men cheered, savage and wild. But Zheng Yi Sao did not smile. She looked at the bound man writhing in the dirt and saw not victory, but the shape of a deeper war. For if this prince with no crown could buy mercenaries, how many more like him lurked in the shadows of the empire? How many nobles, magistrates, hungry men with coin to spare and fear to mask? The sea had no shortage of enemies, and now the rivers joined them. She turned to Chung Po. "Take him to the flagship. He will answer to the ledger, not to whispers." Chung Po bowed, eyes burning with the kind of loyalty that comes only when men see a leader walk into fire and return, untouched, as they marched the prisoner down to the river. Zheng Yi Sao looked once more at the mansion, the silk, the silver, the shadows. She burned it. Flames devoured the walls. Smoke curled into the sky. The villagers would see it for miles. A message: the river belongs to the sea. But as the smoke rose, a gull wheeled overhead, crying harshly. Zheng Yi Sao tilted her head, uneasy, for, in that cry, she heard not victory, but warning. The empire would not ignore this, and the storm was far from over. The smoke of the burned mansion clung to the river for days, drifting in long grey veils that curled into fishermen's nets and carried whispers faster than any courier. Villagers told the tale in lowered voices: the widow who burned a prince without a crown, the woman who made the river bow. By the time the Red Flag fleet rejoined its greater body on the coast, the story had already outpaced them, twisted by fear and awe until children shivered at shadows and merchants weighed there. Cargoes with trembling hands, but the sea is never still when men speak too much. The empire had heard. The first sign came with silence. Imperial patrols, usually noisy with gongs and arrogant with flags, vanished. Their war junks retreated up harbors, as if the coastline itself had grown teeth. Then, rumors. A gathering of ships at Canton. A fleet larger than any seen in decades, commanded not by petty bureaucrats, but by Admiral's son, Quan himself, man whose name was carved on memorials of victory against foreign navies in her cabin. Zheng Yi Sao read the reports with calm precision. The ledger opened beside her like an old friend. Chung Po paced, restless. The scarred captain glowered like a bull, denied a fight. "They mean to crush us," Chung Po said. "No more negotiations, no paper tricks. A hammer big enough to break the sea." "They think the sea is a stone," Zheng Yi Sao murmured. She traced the map with her fan's lacquered edge. "It is not. It flows, it bends, it swallows." The scarred captain spat on the floor. "Let them come. Better to die with steel in hand than wait for knives in shadows. Die," she said sharply, her eyes cutting to him. "We do not die. We rule, we outlast. We make the emperor kneel in exhaustion before we kneel in defeat." The words cut through the air, a verdict. Even the scarred captain bowed his head. When the imperial fleet arrived, it was not in silence. The horizon bloomed with banners, red and gold snapping in the wind. the characters for heaven's wrath painted on sails that caught the dawn like fire. Drums rolled, thunder on water. The villagers on shore fell to their knees, praying, spitting, some weeping with relief, others with terror. 70 war junks, each bristling with cannons, each crew drilled to precision. A wall of wood and iron advancing on the sea. Zheng Yi Sao stood at the prow of her flagship. Her red sails unfurled wide as wings. Her fleet stretched behind her hundreds of junks, cutters, fishing boats turned warships, sails painted in the colors of law. Her men beat their drums, not to intimidate, but to remind. This was no rabble. This was a nation afloat. The scarred captain laughed, wild. It will be the greatest slaughter the sea has ever seen. No, she said quietly. It will be the greatest bargain. He stared at her, confused. Chung Po looked at her with the sharpness of someone trying to read not her words, but her intent. The first clash was thunder. Cannons roared, smoke churned across the water, arrows hissed like locusts. Ships closed, grappled, men screamed and fell into the hungry sea. But Zheng Yi Sao had not built her empire on brute force. She had built it on discipline. Her drummers beat steady, her signals crisp. Ships moved in patterns that seemed chaotic until you saw the rhythm, the law of the fleet. When an imperial junk tried to ram, cutters slipped behind and severed rudders. When cannons fired, sails shifted, catching wind that twisted ships out of aim. Still, the red flag bled. Men fell, decks cracked, masts toppled. The scarred captain fought like a man possessed, blood streaking his face. Chung Po's ship cut through enemies like a hawk among pigeons, his shouts carrying across the water like drums themselves. On her flagship, Zheng Yi Sao watched not the battle but the balance. She knew this was not about victory. It was about survival long enough for her trap to close, because she had sent envoys days before to foreign traders, to Portuguese captains hungry for coin, to merchants who feared the empire more than pirates. She had promised them shares, safety, trade without bribes. And now, on the horizon, new sails appeared, white, foreign, bristling with guns of their own. The imperial fleet faltered. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Who were these new ships? Allies, enemies? The sea itself seemed to grin. Zheng Yi Sao raised her fan. Now, she whispered, her drummers thundered, her fleet surged. The imperial line cracked. 2 junks collided, fire erupting. Arrows blackened the sky. The sea boiled with bodies, wood and blood. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, Admiral Sun Quan signaled retreat. His precious fleet, battered and bleeding, turned up, abandoning the coast it had sworn to cleanse. The red flag fleet roared in victory, drums shaking the air, men leaping, embracing, laughing with the hysteria of the living. But Zheng Yi Sao did not celebrate. She stood at the prow, her eyes on the horizon where the imperial sails vanished into smoke. They will return, she said, with more, always with more. Chung Po joined her, face streaked with soot, hair wild. We beat them. We proved we are not shadows. She turned to him, her eyes sharp, tired, infinite. Yes, which means now they will come not only with ships. They will come with words, with gold, with poisons, with betrayals. They will come until we are not fighting the sea, but drowning in it. He looked at her, unsettled. Then what do we do? She opened her fan, let it snap once in the wind. We burn brighter than they can smother. We write our names so deep in the water that even when the sea forgets, the sky will remember. That night, in the glow of fires across the anchored fleet, she called the captains. Their faces were lit by flame, their eyes wild with victory. She held the ledger open. The law remains, she said. Victory does not make us beasts. Loot is shared. Prisoners are ransomed, not butchered. Women are untouched. Children are protected. These laws are why we won today. They are why we will win tomorrow. The scarred captain, blood still drying on his cheek, raised his sword. To the widow, to the sea. The fleet roared, a sound so loud the gulls fled into the night. But Zheng Yi Sao did not bask. She looked past the flames, past the cheering men, past the horizon. In her mind, she already saw the next shadow. For every empire of wood and iron burns. The question is not if. It is when. And when it comes, she vowed, it will burn on her terms. The smoke of the burned mansion clung to the river for days, drifting in long grey veils that curled into fishermen's nets and carried whispers faster than any courier. Villagers told the tale in lowered voices. The widow who burned a prince without a crown, the woman who made the river bow. By the time the red flag fleet rejoined its greater body on the coast, the story had already outpaced them, twisted by fear and awe, until children shivered at shadows and merchants weighed there, cargoes with trembling hands. But the sea is never still when men speak too much. The empire had heard. The first sign came with silence. Imperial patrols, usually noisy with gongs and arrogant with flags, vanished. Their war junks retreated up harbors, as if the coastline itself had grown teeth. Then, rumors, a gathering of ships at Canton, a fleet larger than any seen in decades, commanded not by petty bureaucrats, but by Admiral's son, Quan himself, a man whose name was carved on memorials of victory against foreign navies. In her cabin, Zheng Yi Sao read the reports with calm precision. The ledger opened beside her like an old friend. Chang Po paced, restless. The scarred captain glowered, like a bull denied a fight. They mean to crush us, Chang Po said. No more negotiations, no paper tricks. A hammer big enough to break the sea. They think the sea is a stone, Zheng Yi Sao murmured. She traced the map with her fan's lacquered edge. It is not. It flows, it bends, it swallows. The scarred captain spat on the floor. Let them come. Better to die with steel in hand than wait for knives in shadows. Die, she said sharply, her eyes cutting to him. We do not die. We rule, we outlast. We make the emperor kneel in exhaustion before we kneel in defeat. The words cut through the air, a verdict. Even the scarred captain bowed his head. When the imperial fleet arrived, it was not in silence. The horizon bloomed with banners, red and gold snapping in the wind. The characters for heaven's wrath painted on sails that caught the dawn like fire. Drums rolled, thunder on water. The villagers on shore fell to their knees, praying, spitting, some weeping with relief, others with terror. 70 war junks, each bristling with cannons, each crew drilled to precision. A wall of wood and iron advancing on the sea. Zheng Yi Sao stood at the prow of her flagship, her red sails unfurled wide as wings. Her fleet stretched behind her hundreds of junks. Cutters, fishing boats, turned warships, sails painted in the colors of law. Her men beat their drums, not to intimidate, but to remind. This was no rabble. This was a nation afloat. The scarred captain laughed, wild. It will be the greatest slaughter the sea has ever seen. No, she said quietly. It will be the greatest bargain. He stared at her, confused. Chung Po looked at her with the sharpness of someone trying to read not her words, but her intent. The first clash was thunder. Cannons roared, smoke churned across the water, arrows hissed like locusts. Ships closed, grappled, men screamed and fell into the hungry sea. But Zheng Yi Sao had not built her empire on brute force. She had built it on discipline. Her drummers beat steady, her signals crisp. Ships moved in patterns that seemed chaotic until you saw the rhythm, the law of the fleet. When an imperial junk tried to ram, cutters slipped behind and severed rudders. When cannons fired, sails shifted, catching wind that twisted ships out of aim. Still, the red flag bled. Men fell, decks cracked, masts toppled. The scarred captain fought like a man possessed, blood streaking his face. Chung Po's ship cut through enemies like a hawk among pigeons, his shouts carrying across the water like drums themselves. On her flagship, Zheng Yi Sao watched not the battle but the balance. She knew this was not about victory. It was about survival long enough for her trap to close, because she had sent envoys days before to foreign traders, to Portuguese captains hungry for coin, to merchants who feared the empire more than pirates. She had promised them shares, safety, trade without bribes. And now, on the horizon, new sails appeared, white, foreign, bristling with guns of their own. The imperial fleet faltered. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Who were these new ships? Allies, enemies? The sea itself seemed to grin. Zheng Yi Sao raised her fan. Now, she whispered. Her drummers thundered. Her fleet surged. The imperial line cracked. Two junks collided, fire erupting. Arrows blackened the sky. The sea boiled with bodies, wood, and blood. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, Admiral Sun Quan signaled retreat. His precious fleet, battered and bleeding, turned up, abandoning the coast it had sworn to cleanse. The red flag fleet roared in victory, drums shaking the air, men leaping, embracing, laughing with the hysteria of the living. But Zheng Yi Sao did not celebrate. She stood at the prow, her eyes on the horizon where the imperial sails vanished into smoke. They will return, she said, with more. Always with more. Chung Po joined her, face streaked with soot, hair wild. We beat them. We proved we are not shadows. She turned to him, her eyes sharp, tired, infinite. Yes, which means now they will come not only with ships. They will come with words, with gold, with poisons, with betrayals. They will come until we are not fighting the sea, but drowning in it. He looked at her, unsettled. Then what do we do? She opened her fan, let it snap once in the wind. We burn brighter than they can smother. We write our names so deep in the water that even when the sea forgets, the sky will remember. That night, in the glow of fires across the anchored fleet, she called the captains. Their faces were lit by flame, their eyes wild with victory. She held the ledger open. The law remains, she said. Victory does not make us beasts. Loot is shared. Prisoners are ransomed, not butchered. Women are untouched. Children are protected. These laws are why we won today. They are why we will win tomorrow. The scarred captain, blood still drying on his cheek, raised his sword. To the widow. To the sea. The fleet roared, a sound so loud the gulls fled into the night. But Zheng Yi Sao did not bask. She looked past the flames, past the cheering men, past the horizon. In her mind, she already saw the next shadow, for every empire of wood and iron burns. The question is not if, it is when. And when it comes, she vowed, it will burn on her terms. And so it ended. The most feared pirate empire in history dissolved not by cannon, but by a woman's pen. Zheng Yi Sao Ching Shih, the widow who ruled 70,000 pirates, walked away undefeated. She died in her bed, an old woman, rich beyond emperors, never punished for her crimes. But the sea still remembers her. Every storm, every lawless wave, carries her name. If you thought this tale was wild, wait until you hear the next untold pirate story, the captain who built a floating kingdom of fire and vanished without a trace.